Hello everyone, I'm Arvi Teikari, and I will be giving you a presentation about my game Baba Is You, specifically about the development process of the game, as well as what the future holds for the game. So, without further ado, let's get to it. Here's the structure of my presentation. I will be starting will be a bit explaining a little bit who I am. Then I will explain what Baba Is You is. Then I will go through the kind of development process of Baba, and finally I'll concentrate a little bit on kind of the what future plans I have for the game, or if any. So I'm a game developer based in Helsinki, Finland. I would consider myself to be an indie game developer, and I've been making games since primary school, and I have had an interest in making games even before that. When I was in kindergarten, many kids of my age had older siblings who played video games, and for example, my cousin had a Super Nintendo console with which I played Super Mario World and similar games from a very early age. So I was introduced to video games very early. Also, my dad and brother played games on PC, and all this inspired me quite a lot. I was always very interested in creating things, and in kindergarten I remember that many kids drew their own games on paper and showed them to other kids. And there was kind of a thing where you would ask other kids to play your game, and they would maybe like show with their finger what they are doing on the level, and if they were your good friend, they would solve everything correctly, or if you didn't like them, they might suddenly get attacked by a monster and die, or something like that. It's been a while, but I remember it being kind of a funny simulation of playing video games, because we were too young to play them too much ourselves, or to make any of them. And in primary school, I had already had the interest of learning how to make games, but I didn't have the know-how. I tried to learn Quick Basic, and I did make some text adventures with Quick Basic, but it didn't really fulfill my desire to make games. And in, I think, 5th grade, a schoolmate introduced me to Game Maker. And that seemed like the answer to all my needs in this sense. But it turned out that Game Maker, a game creation tool, has its own scripting language, the GML. And because I was still a primary schooler, I didn't speak very good English. I had fairly low patience, so I didn't really have what it took to learn the scripting language. And as such, the games I could make were fairly simplistic and limited. And at the time, there were a lot of Finnish kids making games with a variety of tools and releasing them online. Another of these tools was called the Games Factory, made by Click Team, I think France-based company, which didn't require any scripting knowledge, and I kind of naturally migrated towards the Games Factory because it seemed more suited for me, and eventually started using it. And as you can see at the bottom of this slide, there's mainly no actual programming, so I've actually stuck with the same product family ever since. I moved from the Games Factory to Multimedia Fusion 1.5 and then finally to Multimedia Fusion 2. It's taken me a long time to actually get into programming proper, and only over the past maybe 6 years, I've started learning the Lua scripting language, which has worked as kind of a stepping point to real programming languages. But I want to stress that my experience is that you don't really need to be a quote-unquote real programmer to make games. There are many good tools nowadays, and as long as you can create the things that you have in your mind and you can fulfill your creative needs, the tool shouldn't matter quite as much. I started as a hobbyist, and after high school, or the Finnish equivalent. I thought I wouldn't want to make games as my career because I thought that it would be too uncertain. I was scared of losing the interest in making games if I did it as my job. And also, I was just kind of scared of the uncertain life of being having a company and running a company. So I went to do other things and decided to keep game development as my hobby. But over time, it still developed into a career because of circumstances. Early on in my game development career/hobby, I made a lot of small experimental freeware games. This was in about 2008, 2009, 2010. And I also participated in a lot of game jams, for example, the Nordic Game Jam in Copenhagen, as well as the Ludum Dare game jam that is online, and both are still being organized. Game jams in general have been very important for me because I like to kind of quickly try out an idea, see if it works, and not really spend too much time on a single idea unless I really decide to make it into something larger. Under my own company, I've released 2 games so far. There's Environmental Station Alpha, a Metroid-like platformer from 2015, and then Baba Is You from 2019. On top of that, I worked many years on the game Noita in the Nolla Games team. Some of you might have heard of that as well, which we kind of put out the final update for, or the epilogue update for, about a year ago. Okay, so that's it about me. What is Baba Is You? So, Baba Is You is a puzzle game that follows in the footsteps of the classic puzzle game Sokoban. Sokoban is kind of probably isn't the first puzzle game of its type, but it definitely kind of popularized this grid-based, turn-based block pushing system. So Sokoban is about pushing boxes onto marked spots, and you win a level when you have pushed every box onto their marked spot. There is literally nothing in the game except you, the boxes, the spots you need to push the boxes onto, and walls. And this simple concept has inspired a lot of puzzle games over time. And I feel that especially over the past maybe 8 years or so, there has been kind of a renaissance of new puzzle games that have concentrated on what we have dubbed thinkiness, this kind of like fair solvability. It's kind of hard to define what exactly it means, but I feel that in general there has been a newfound interest in making puzzle games where the challenge could be considered fair in that the player is given all the information they need, and the puzzles are more about figuring out how you can use the tools you have, understanding the mechanics rather than, for example, finding a hidden wall or something. Of course, those kinds of puzzle games have existed well before, but I feel that especially these games based on Sokoban have become much more popular over the past years. And one of the examples of this is the game Stephen's Sausage Roll, which is one of my favorite puzzle games. It's a game about grilling sausages. That's what you do, and it's very difficult but very satisfying, and it encapsulates very well this idea of taking this block pushing system into a new direction, and the puzzles kind of giving you all the information you need technically, and you having to kind of understand the systems to be able to solve the puzzles. Another example is Snakebird by Nomenon Games, which is another favorite of mine. It's a very difficult game where you control a snake that is also a bird in order to eat fruit and get to the goal. Furthermore, there's Puzzle Script by Stephen Lavelle, a simple HTML5 scripting language that lets you make your own small block pushing games. A Monsters Expedition by Alan Hazelden, or Alan Hazelden's company. Pipe Push Paradise and Bonfire Peaks, to name a few. There are quite a few of these kinds of games. And what I like about these games is, as I said, they take this very simple concept of push an object somewhere and they add some kind of a twist to it. And it's sometimes very fun to see just kind of what the twist is. In what ways can they make this kind of a simplistic idea into something less simplistic or something that I hadn't considered before. And Baba Is You is part of this group of puzzle games, and Baba Is You also adds a twist to this concept. And in Baba Is You, the twist is that some of these pushable blocks in the levels are actually words, and you can push the words to form sentences. And these sentences form rules which affect the game. And in fact, almost all the things you do in the game are dictated by the rules. So very few things in the game have meaning on their own. If you have some kind of a, like this box or a flag or a wall, but on their own, they don't do anything. They are just decorations. But when you apply a rule to them, they gain kind of meaning and purpose in the level. So the game is about breaking and changing the rules. I will give you a small example in a moment. Another big part of Baba Is You is that the puzzles are meant to be insight-based. I learned this term from the Let's Player Alex Diener, who used it to mean puzzles that require you to figure out something new, where you have knowledge of how the game works, but levels kind of require you to understand some new implication of the rules that you might not have considered before. This is in contrast to games or puzzles where you have all the information from the get-go, and the puzzle doesn't require you to understand anything new or learn anything new or apply the knowledge in a uniquely new way, but instead asks you to utilize your knowledge of the system in increasingly complex ways, so that the difficulty comes from kind of managing to keep the whole structure in your head and managing to wrangle the whole structure instead of having this kind of a insight or aha moment and realizing something, some kind of organically implied but hard to figure out implication of the system. So just to give a couple of examples what Baba Is You is about, here's the creature Baba, the small creature in the middle of the screen. And there we have the rule Baba Is You. So actually the name of the game is already a rule on it itself. And Baba Is You means that Baba, this creature you see, is you, the player. So you control Baba. If something is you, then you can use the arrow keys or a controller if you're playing on the Nintendo Switch or whatever method to move around and interact with the level. So at any time in the game, something needs to be you. Otherwise, in almost all cases, you won't be able to interact with the game. And that is not ideal, because then you can't usually solve the puzzle. And here's an example of a puzzle in the game. We have the rule wall is stop and the rule flag is win. In every level, something that is you needs to touch something that is win. That is your goal. And let's assume that Baba Is You, the rule seen earlier, is somewhere out of screen. Wall is stop means that the walls act as obstacles. Baba is not able to move through the walls. So Baba needs to figure out a way to get to the flag despite the walls being stop. And furthermore, the rule flag is win, that makes the flag the kind of win condition, is also inside the wall. So Baba cannot change the kind of target, Baba cannot change the victory condition to say, for example, Baba is win instead. So what Baba can do is just break the rule wall is stop, in order to make the walls no longer actually an obstacle, but instead just decorative pieces, and Baba is able to walk through them to the flag, as you can see in the lower picture. So a big part of the game is this kind of learning new rule words that you can interact with, and then changing the rules in levels in order to achieve your goals and get something that is you into something that is win. For example, there could also be a level where instead of having to break the rule wall is stop, Baba would have to say wall is you, and suddenly maybe Baba would no longer be the player character, but instead the walls would be the player character. And now to win the level, the walls would need to touch the flag instead of Baba, and that would be completely valid. I feel that this kind of taking familiar concepts like victory flags and walls and pushable rocks and keys and doors, and allowing you to change their meanings and swap those around is a big part of what makes Baba Is You interesting to many players. I don't actually know if this is true, but it has been kind of my hunch. I think that there's kind of a exhilarating excitement about the fact that suddenly the walls might be something completely different. They are no longer the obstacle that they usually are in games, but instead they could be the player or some other game component. So, the development process of the game. It all started actually in a game jam, in Nordic Game Jam 2017. As I mentioned, I've been participating a lot in these game jams, and they have been very useful for me as a way of kind of trying out an idea I have in my head, because usually these game jams, to just quickly explain what a game jam is, they are usually events where you have a very limited time frame during which you need to create a game, usually according to a theme. They differ quite a bit in how long the time frame is, do you have teams, how closely you have to follow the theme, is there something extra to do, so on. Nordic Game Jam is a fairly relaxed game jam, I would say. You can form teams. There's technically a winner. There's a voting at the end of the event, usually has been at least, but you are not forced to follow the theme very closely. You are allowed to just make something. You can also work on your own. But the thing is that you still have to finish something in 48 hours. You have 2 days. 48 hours is, I think, the standard for game jams. And because I had participated in quite a few game jams prior to this, and because I had some existing projects, I actually thought, coming to the event, that I wouldn't be making a game at all for the game jam. I was maybe more interested in meeting my friends in Copenhagen, hanging out, having a good time, not stressing about making a game. Because if you make a game in 48 hours, it's very easy for it to be very stressful and you not to get enough sleep and such. Usually it's very important to get a lot of kind of recovery time after a game jam, or trying to avoid overworking yourself, because it's very easy to overwork yourself in those kinds of conditions. So I thought I would take it easy. But when I heard the theme of the game jam, which was not there, I had been playing a bunch of puzzle games. For example, Stephen's Sausage Roll, A Good Snowman is Hard to Build, Cosmic Express, the game The Witness. And all of these had inspired me quite a bit. And I had also wanted to make a puzzle game for a long time, but I had always run into some design issues. So when I heard the theme not there, these ideas in my head started doing something together. Who knows? I don't know. My brain processes, and it's also been 5 years now. So I started thinking of how in logic you can have some concept, for example, happy, and then you can reverse its meaning by saying not happy. You can apply not as a negation. And this somehow gave me this idea, mental image, so to say, of a pool of lava that is, of course, very hot. It's lava. Then you have blocks of ice, which, well, they are ice, they can melt, but you would be able to say ice is not melt in order to make the ice not melt. This seemed like a potentially interesting idea, but also potentially very boring idea. I had a lot of puzzle game ideas in the past fail because they didn't actually manage to turn up enough interesting puzzles. And also I was kind of expecting that this idea might be too difficult to implement during a game jam. So I wasn't very convinced about this mental image, but I decided to prototype it anyway, because as I mentioned, game jams for me are nice in that they allow me to do that kind of thing. I'll try if this works. If it doesn't, then I only spent 48 hours on it. It's fine. If it works, then that's great. So I went on to prototype the idea, and it turned out to work much better than I anticipated. I didn't run into implementational issues that I was expecting. Well, of course, during Game Jam, I couldn't create that many puzzles, but I was able to create enough puzzles for the needs of the Game Jam. And also other people showed interest in the game. And I ended up being voted the winner of the event. Baba Is You was so well liked. But I have to admit that even after this, I was still uncertain. What do I want to do with this game? Is it worth it to make a full game out of this? Because sometimes at game jams, when you make a game, it might be a lot of fun at the game jam, but there might be a problem where expanding the idea into a full game or like a commercial title doesn't make sense. The idea is something that works very well on a small scale when played in a social environment with other people, but it might not work as well as kind of like a large scale, big money production, that kind of thing. So yeah, I was unsure what to do. I was also unsure on if I was going to try to make a full game out of this, should I concentrate on making it a puzzly game, kind of a puzzle concentrating game, or if I should make a more of a sandboxy thing, because a lot of people seem to like the fact that you can change the rules and seem to like the idea of just playing around with the rules. I felt that there were kind of two options for me to choose from. Either I could make a more playful sandboxy thing where you don't really have difficult obstacles to overcome, but rather have interesting situations where you can play with the rules and try to solve them in different ways. Or I could concentrate more on the puzzling thing and make a more difficult, more heavily problem-solving concentrated game. I discussed this with some colleagues, and my colleagues also gave me a lot of encouragement and kind of requests to make a full game. So ultimately, as you can probably see by now, I ended up deciding to work on the game further, and I also decided that I'll make a puzzle game out of it, because I felt that what I want personally to play and make is a puzzle game. So I felt that if I made a sandboxy game, I might do a worse job of it, because I wouldn't be as kind of interested myself in what I was doing. Whereas with puzzle games, I know that I like puzzle games. I would be doing what I want to do. Furthermore, some people told me that the game gave them some interesting thoughts about consciousness and philosophy, because in the game you have the word you, and whatever is you the player. So when you change the rule Baba is you into, for example, rock is you, it could be construed as the consciousness moving from Baba to the rock. And some people found this an interesting implication. And when I started working on the full version of the game, I was kind of unsure of whether I should kind of do something with this idea. And actually I was contacted by someone who told me that they would be interested in writing a story for the game. And this seemed very intriguing. I hadn't really thought myself of these philosophical concepts when making the game. I usually concentrate quite heavily on the mechanics and not really the kind of thematical or story things when making game jam games. So I gave it some thought and ultimately decided that I would like to do my own thing, not try to make a story-driven game, but take some ideas from these philosophical considerations and integrate them into the game. So I decided to make a game that doesn't really have much of a story, but still has some kind of a story, or at least kind of a backstory or lore on which the game builds. And less than a month, or maybe about a month after the game jam, I released the first version to my game developer friends. And throughout the process, I got a lot of feedback, very invaluable feedback from my colleagues and also people who were interested in the game. I can't overstate how important that was for the success of the game. I'm very grateful for everyone who gave their thoughts and tested the game and told me what works and what doesn't work, because the game required a lot of that kind of work done on it. And as I started moving from the game jam version into what would eventually become the full version, I had to answer some questions which could be culminated on: how do I want the game to look? What kind of a style do I want to go for? And especially, do I want to do things myself at the risk of the game looking or sounding worse than it could if I let someone who is actually a professional graphics designer or audio designer do the audio and graphics? Or, well, should I do exactly that? Should I hire someone to make sure that the game looks very polished and sounds very polished? Should I maybe go for 3D art? Should I kind of try to make the game look very professional? And as might have become apparent at this point already, I usually enjoy doing things on my own if possible. I like the idea of kind of having everything in my control, but also I don't like the idea of failing someone. I don't like the idea that if I do a bad decision where I make some kind of a design that doesn't work or requires a lot of work or is frustrating, that someone else suffers out of that. So when I feel that I want to do things on my own, there's both an element of kind of selfishness or wanting to do things my way and wanting to have creative control, but also this feeling that it would be very stressful if my potential failures would cause harm to other people. So ultimately, I decided that because the game had gotten a lot of positive feedback from game developer friends, and also the jam version had gotten some positive attention on the internet, I thought that the game idea was so strong that I would be able to take the risk of making the graphics and the audio more maybe simplistic, more minimalistic, without risking too much. I felt that even if the game was considered to look bad or sound bad by players, the idea was good enough that people would still be interested in the game. And so I decided to go that way. With the graphics, it was an easier choice because I had already kind of a plan for the visuals in my mind. For the audio, it was more difficult because I haven't really done audio in too many games before. But in the end, I actually thought of it as kind of like a self-imposed challenge where I wanted to see, could I make the soundtrack for a game? Could I make a full game, full commercial game, where the audio was done by me without it being a complete failure? And so I set out to make the game, and I spent about 2 years on it. Very quickly, it turned out that it was a lot of fun to just kind of tinker with the game, add new rule words, add new levels, play with the ideas. I had originally estimated about 60 levels to be in the game. Ultimately, it ended up having over 200 levels with another about 150 added in a later update. The first year or so of development was kind of unfocused process where I added new things, didn't really have a fully clear idea of when to stop. And then over the second year, maybe I started kind of toning down the development and forming kind of a structure for what the game would be, even though I did have some ideas even earlier. But there were also certain things that required a lot of time to mature in my head, especially the kind of, if the game is going to have secret content, which I wanted, what kind of secret content would it have? How would the secret content be accessed? That was a very big design question that took me a long time to answer. When designing levels for the game, I usually try to think of funny interactions between words, kind of funny implications of the rules of the game, basically of these insights that I mentioned earlier, this kind of things that naturally follow from the way the game works, but that might not be immediately obvious or that might be amusing to see. And then when I got an idea for that, something like that, I tried to make a level that forced that interaction. I call this reverse engineering, where I started from the end position of the level and thought, what kind of a structure leads into this end state so that you have to use this interaction that I have in mind. And that worked fairly well. I, of course, used a lot of different other tools as well for the design, but it's generally making levels was at least relatively smooth, except for the fact that this reverse engineering approach left me open to a lot of unintended solutions in the levels. It was very easy to concentrate too heavily on this interaction I had in mind and miss some other approach that would be way easier and more trivial. And especially in the early levels, because people had liked the playfulness of the game, I definitely wanted to allow the player to experiment and play with the words. So in the early levels, I let some of these unintended solutions to stay, to allow the players to solve the levels in multiple different ways. But I felt that as the levels got more difficult, the unintended solutions usually were fairly similar to each other. There's only so many ways you can break a puzzle. So I thought, in order to make the game a more concentrated puzzle game and to make the levels not feel too samey, I would want to reduce the amount of unintended solutions in later levels. So this was the design thought behind implementing the levels on a rough scale. And as I worked on the game, I submitted it to a bunch of different events. For example, the Independent Games Festival, Indiecade, and Gamescom. And those were very nice in terms of keeping up my own motivation to work on the game, because the game got some awards. For example, the Excellence in Design Award at the Independent Games Festival and the Audience Choice Award at Indiecade. So it was very nice to see that people were interested in the game. But also those served as testing opportunities, because most of the testing for the game was done by other game developers who, of course, had their own approach to games, who had a lot of kind of understanding of how games work. So letting non-game developers play the game at these events was probably very useful, because it let me see some oversights that might not be a problem for someone who knows how games generally work, but could be very problematic for someone who doesn't know how games usually work, Or I could see live reactions from players so that I can understand that, okay, that part seems to frustrate a lot of players instead of being enjoyable, or that part people seem to like quite a bit, or I didn't even realize that this particular thing would be a difficult thing for the players. I assumed it would be very obvious, so I need to adjust the difficulty curve. So these events were very important, of course, just also in terms of building up hype about the game, building up kind of a good word about the game, but also in order to kind of get feedback and get encouragement myself. In, I think, 2018, I started collaborating with the Danish company MP2 Games to work on a Nintendo Switch version of the game. I was very happy to be in a position to release the game on Nintendo Switch because I've been a Nintendo fanboy for a long time, and being able to do my first console release and being able to be on a Nintendo platform seemed like a very cool thing, and also like a good business decision. Later on, we would also work on a mobile version with MP2 Games, which was released in the summer of 2021. And after the game's release in 2019, in March 2019, we also started working on a level editor update, which would allow players to make their own levels, share their own levels, to kind of encourage this creativity and sandboxiness of the game that I had ignored to a large extent during the puzzle development process. But also the level editor update added new levels, because as I mentioned, it was a lot of fun to think of new words, to add new things to the game. So I didn't also want to limit myself in terms of, now the game is done, I cannot add anything more myself. So the level editor update that released in November 2021 was a kind of I would maybe say that it was to some extent more of like a personal self-indulgence, where I didn't really worry too much if it would be a smart move business-wise. It was more that it was something that I really wanted to do. And because Baba Is You had been fairly successful commercially, I felt that I had the means to do that, even if it wasn't maybe the most efficient choice business-wise. I don't actually know, but it could be that moving on to something else could have been better. But I'm very happy that the game now has a level editor. People have made a lot of really cool levels. There's over 7,000 levels already uploaded online, and we have been highlighting some levels in the game using a kind of a featured levels section. So all in all, I'm very happy about how the game has done after release and how people have how the reception has been for the game. And I'm also happy that Baba and the other creatures in the game have been found by people to be interesting, or at least cute. And there's been a lot of really nice fan art of the game. I appreciate that, because before Baba Is You, none of my games had been quite popular enough to warrant quite that level of response. So it was also an exciting new experience for me. So then, for the future of Baba Is You, what lays in store? The most important thing for me is that I've been trying to slow down development a little bit. Baba Is You currently has a very active community, and the community has a lot of interest in the game continuing its life for the foreseeable future. And I don't personally, of course, mind that. It's very cool that people are so interested in the game, but it has the problem that I've spent quite a lot of mental energy on the game already. And for example, in 2019, when the game released, I feel that I had maybe a little bit of a burnout because I wanted to handle things myself, including marketing and public relations. and that took a lot out of me. As you can see on the slide, I answered about 1,400 emails related to Baba Is You just over the first year, or maybe not even that, maybe even a shorter time period. So Baba has taken a lot out of me, and especially after the level editor update, I've wanted to at least take a little break from concentrating hard on the game, and release some smaller games and concentrate on my other projects. But despite that, there's been kind of a lot of pondering going on, both in the community and within my own head and between me and MP2 Games, as to what do we want to add to the game. There are a lot of feature requests from the community, for example, the ability to share packs of levels instead of just individual levels. And many of those ideas are such that I would really want to add them. I like the idea a ton. But as it says there on the slide, there's kind of a concern between the amount of effort something takes and the amount of utility it gives us. Kind of to put in other words, how many players are actually going to use a feature we add, because we could spend forever adding new features, making a full, maybe like a Super Mario Maker 2 like system for sharing levels and voting on them and checking the most popular levels and so on. But especially because Baba at this point is 3 years old technically, it's increasingly something to keep in mind that, of course, the active community is going to like these things if we add them, but eventually it is necessary to also consider kind of the business reasoning or the kind of a monetary concerns. What am I going to do next in order to kind of keep my company running and so on? So this is kind of the unfortunate situation that we find ourselves in. Or not unfortunate, because there's, as mentioned, there's a lot of interest in the game still. And there's a lot of these cool ideas that could be added, but this kind of consideration of monetary concerns and the utility of features versus the effort of adding them is kind of unfortunate, but I feel that it has to be done. Further plans for Baba Is You is that I would like to run some events related to the game. It was part of the Cerebral showcase on Steam recently, but I also kind of would like to organize maybe some Baba Is You level making events, or otherwise kind of participate with the community, make it clear that I care about the game and the community and that I want to kind of keep supporting both of them. I'll skip the next point for a moment to go to the next one. So as part of this kind of wanting to show that I care about the game and also its world, is that I've been thinking about various game ideas that are not directly Baba Is You, but that could be related to the characters or the game world. As I mentioned, the game didn't have that much of a story, but it still had kind of a background structure, some background lore that I thought about. And after the game's release, I've been thinking more about that lore and background setting. And I have a bunch of game ideas that I think could be fun to make and put into the same world, so that they are not Baba Is You, but they are part of the Baba verse, so to say. It would be kind of fun if people could kind of feel that there's this world of characters and games set within the same world, and I want to see how that goes. I've already released a couple of games this year that explore this idea. For example, Baba Is You Extreme, which you can download for free on the itch.io website. It's for Windows only, unfortunately, but if you're interested, feel free to check that out. Also, part of this, idea of making small games related to Baba Is You is that as part of the slowing down development this year, I've decided to try to get back to my roots a little bit and make these small experimental games. I initially had the plan of releasing a small game every month this year, which has failed, but I still have a lot of these small things that maybe wouldn't work as kind of a full-scale commercial game, but could be a lot of fun to showcase people as small prototypes. So I kind of want to spend at least this year making something like that, concentrating on these kind of experiments. And some of them could have Baba Is You characters in them as well. Further, to return to the point that we skipped, I've been thinking about some kind of a follow-up to Baba Is You, because I have some ideas that could work in Baba Is You, but that are maybe too complicated, too difficult to implement to the game as it is right now. Partially because the engine for the game is still originally made with Multimedia Fusion, which has its own limitations. For example, 3D is not an option at all. 3D might not be the most important thing for Baba Is You. People have seemed to like the graphical style quite a bit. But still, there are things that might be cool to see in the game, but that I don't want to add to the game as it is right now. So I've been considering maybe making some kind of an HD version, or like a remake of the game that has some of the original content, but also has some new content that couldn't be done with the game as it is right now. Or maybe it could even be a sequel that explores something completely new. A problem with the sequel is, of course, that the original game already explored many of the, or most of the basic, simple implications of the system. So a sequel would maybe need to tread some familiar ground to make people who didn't play the original game more acquainted with the systems. So there's some design considerations there, but these are definitely thoughts that have been floating in my mind. And yeah, there's a repeat of the same thing that I already said, that Baba Is You has turned out to be popular. The characters seem to be popular. There seem to be interest in Baba Is You, even if the game is technically done for the most part right now. So considering these options of what to do next that could be related to Baba Is You feels natural. I also have, for example, an idea for an RPG that featured Baba Is You characters. It feels kind of silly, but at the same time, I kind of like the idea. What if there was a turn-based RPG system built around the concept of Baba Is You, featuring the characters? So there's a lot of these kind of ideas that could be made into reality, and it will remain to be seen which ones of those, if any, will actually become reality. Finally, there's the consideration of merchandise. I've been very slow at handling this thing. There have been certain personal concerns in terms of sustainability and environmental friendliness of producing, for example, plushies. But the merchandise question is still slightly unanswered. But I think people have been requesting a lot of merchandise, especially a Baba plush and fridge magnet sets of the words of the game have been requested a lot. So yeah, it's something that I'm thinking about, but that is in some ways a difficult question for me to answer. Although I do currently wear a Baba Is You t-shirt that I made for myself, or ordered for myself some time ago. So there's already some unofficial official merchandise over there or around here. Yeah, looks like my presentation didn't take quite the 60 minutes that was allocated for it, but I think that was pretty much everything I wanted to say. I hope my presentation wasn't too long-winded. I hope you found this interesting, and thank you very much for listening. And I hope if you have played Baba Is You enjoyed it, or at least thought it was interesting. If you haven't played it, well, there's the Game Jam version that I released in 2017 is still available for free on my itch.io profile or my itch.io page, so you could give that a go to see if you like the idea. In any case, thank you very much for having me, and have a great day.